Hi, today I have with me Victor Sauers, and we are going to be talking about the grid. I appreciate your time, and I just want to mention that we met at an Ivy Fawn Network conference, and we sat on panels 2 years in a row at the time of South by Southwest in Austin, and we were both on, an energy panel, and it was a really good one last time. I enjoyed that, enjoyed meeting you, and appreciate your expertise. But what I wanted to ask you is, first of all, can you describe what your firm does and what you do?
Sure. So our biggest item is doing syndicated funding for industrial scale energy projects. Within that matrix, we use technology either by other partners or we build it ourselves that enhance the project in question. So in addition to that, we are heavily involved on the regulatory side to understand where the trendings are going, where you can deploy capital efficiently. So it can be anything in the front of the meter, which would be your generation, transmission, and the various things that are current in the energy transition, such as solar, wind, energy storage. Behind the meter, which is load, which is semiconductor, manufacturing, fabs, AI, is huge, Bitcoin, and then incoming manufacturing coming into the US, which is quite heavily. So those are the large areas that we deal with. So a little technology that makes a big difference, and then getting the right capital to the right project in play.
Mm-hmm. Mm. And you also said that in the past I remember you saying you've sat on a work group at ERCOT, right? I mean, is that or
Yeah,
contributed?
currently we sit on the ERCOT Tech Committee in the early stage. This particular working group was the Energy Source Group, which was the technology group, and that was like 10, 15 years ago. And then we also sit on the WMS committee, which is a little more detailed. So gives you an idea what the other stakeholders and members are thinking and doing, and was a huge effort to recover from Winter Storm Uri. So it was you were always learning something. So even though people say Texas is deregulated, but it's heavily regulated. What it is we are ERCOT is a energy market versus most of the markets in the US are a capacity market. But go
Right.
ahead.
Free market. Yeah, right,
Mhm.
exactly. And that kind of plays into what we're going to talk about here for in a moment. So we were discussing recently about the interconnection queues, that there's like a year to two backlogged at ERCOT, which is the Texas grid. And then at FERC, it's like 10 to 12 years. Can you kind of describe, what that means and what that captures, the queue numbers?
Yeah, so ERCOT is not connected to the federal grid per
Right,
se,
right.
right?
Yeah, we
So
do.
the regulatory approval is quicker. There's more land accessibility, and then the way we have an energy market also helps. So between the regulatory side, land, the approval is enormously less because we're not going over state lines. We're a big state,
Right.
so we don't need it. And there are some DC ties going into the national grid, but it's very minor. And Texas is ERCOT is an independent operator that has its own little structures, own little protocols, but we are heavy regulated. So as far as a project per se, you're going to go through an interconnection queue, and you're going to be between something a little over a year to 2.5 years.
Mhm.
If you're trying to do that in the federal grid, you're trying to get something done in Pennsylvania, you're trying to get something done in South Carolina, it's going to be a lot longer. So we have a lot of states that the transmission power can affect. Then you have to get approval at multi-levels, multi-utilities, more than just where that grid is.
Mhm.
So if you have something with a grid, what we call PJM, that's 13 states,
Mhm.
right? It takes a long time to get all approval, just the approval process,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And because of that, the cost is much more. So that affects the ratepayer,
Mm.
right? So those are the big reasons why
Yeah.
there's such a
And
delta difference.
yeah, and most of that is a lot of it right now is solar, and then in some wind. It seems like solar's the lion's share of what's backlogged, from what I can see. I mean, is that correct? And
Yeah, it's just
battery for
it's
us.
right, and it's accessibility to land where wind makes sense based on the wind speed. But even so, if you look at Texas build out renewables was mostly uh on wind, and we're like something like 63 gigawatt of wind in the state of Texas. But most of the low-hanging fruit for the great land that has great wind speed and make construction affordable has been consumed. So the low-hanging fruit, because right now we have very, very little wind in the queue. Versus for solar, we got something like over 150 gigawatt of solar still in queue and about 105 gigawatt of energy storage in
Mhm.
queue at ERCOT.
Right.
So, but nationally, between the renewables and interconnection request, you're talking
Yeah.
overall is like 2.8 terawatt, which is
Wow.
huge, which is 1,000 times bigger than a gigawatt.
Right.
If you take the renewables and the energy storage portion of that pie, it's 1.6 terawatt. And the wait time is years and years and years and years. Basically, it's
Yeah.
so large
Yeah.
that if we had everything under construction with our best contractors, which we call EPCs, you
Yeah.
can do about 40 gigawatt a year. So it take
Right.
30 years to get rid of the queue, right?
Right. Wow.
Nevertheless, will that happen with the Inflation Reduction Act, with the Infrastructure Act? Answers is probably not, because the burden of that much transmission, and our power load in the US is only 1.3 terawatt. That's it.
Hmm.
But when
Yeah.
you're doubling it, you got to be able to back it up. That
Right.
means more wire, more infrastructure, and uh, it's unaffordable. That won't affect the voter.
Right, right, right. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing too. Like I was reading, there was this reliability report by one of the, regions, and it was talking about how, the Inflation Reduction Act absolutely, sets on fire these incentives to, do all these solar projects and all sorts of things. But, like you're discussing, there's all this limiting factor that is, the construction, the capital, everything. So it's kind of distorting things. What would be natural is being distorted, what it sounds like a
Well,
little.
that's a good point. That's what a lot of folks need to understand when it comes to the grid. So
Yeah.
when we look at renewable, the concept, the number one leading line item is you're reducing costs for the ratepayer, and renewables reduces the fuel cost for
Right.
the ratepayer. So renewables in itself doesn't do that because it's low density energy to fossil fuel. If
Right.
you do too much penetration, like California ISO, we call it Cal ISO,
Yeah.
your price goes up. So
Right.
you go from retail in Texas where you're 10, 11 cents per kWh, and in California you're 35 cents per kWh for residential. Huge difference.
Yeah. So I was looking at that recent, because when we were on the panel, it was like mid-March, and I found that ERCOT update where they kind of went into this new legislation that's requiring them to look at future load growth, and I
Mhm.
and I looked at all the numbers, and I can see that there's like 150, let's just average it, 150 gigawatts of load. And then part of it, large load, is 40 gigawatts. And then the Permian is like 24. And they were saying that this new view shows 40 gigawatts more than what they had forecast. Um, that's a lot. Uh, what do you make of that? What does that mean in practical terms?
So when you do a projection and your item says, "Hey, what do you think of building?" Right? What is that projection? How solid is that projection going to be when you've been really flat at 80
Yeah.
gigawatt for a decade, right?
Right.
Per se. right? All of a sudden you can go from 80 to 180 gigawatt, right? Well, no,
Yeah.
but there is a troubling event where not the 40 gigawatt or the 150 gigawatt, we're talking about 19 gigawatt. Now, what do I mean by that? I have this huge chart why is 19 so critical. That 19 gigawatt is a ramp rate in the state of Texas in the next 2.5 years. Now, is that bunch of hyperventilating where people are going, maybe, maybe not, or it's conjuncture? No, this is real construction with real concrete and steel looking for a wire. I'm
Mm-hmm.
simplifying,
Mm-hmm.
right? I got AI data centers that are over 100 acres wide, looking at 1.8 gigawatt for power. I got the Permian needing 4 gigawatt right now because they want to get off generators, right? Which is
Right.
good. They don't want to burn diesel fuel. That's good for the environment,
Right.
good for them, right? So even with those plays going on, we're already talking about 5 and 6 gigawatt, much less the Bitcoin guys. Bitcoin
Right.
guys is about maybe 2.5 to 4 gigawatt. Then
Mm-hmm.
there's manufacturing.
Right.
Manufacturing we're looking easily at another 5 gigawatt. So when you look at it, it says, well, do you have your budget and are you under construction? Because
Mm-hmm.
anything industrial and load is designated by approved funding at this time, right? I can say that, well, we got 40 gigawatt of coming in at X amount of time. But 2.5 years is not 2030.
Mm-hmm.
2030, there's
Yeah.
62 gigawatt, right? Well, out of that, how much of that's true,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Right.
what is that track record? And how well you can build it? Because man, it takes 3 years to get a substation right now,
Uh-huh.
right? Well, 3 years puts us in 2028,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the same token is I need base power.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these projects coming into play, especially AI, they're looking in their construction budget to add on-site power.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on that on-site power, you can fill in the blank to any kind of resource you need because
Right.
they know they're not going to get a wire anytime soon. So
Yeah.
when we tap out between transmission substations, which is different from distribution substations and overhead wire, then when you tap that out, where's that opportunity going to go? And is it still cheaper for a large operator to do on-site power without ERCOT?
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're looking at,
Right.
right? So there's a lot of activity to what can an industrial need to provide their own power plant,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so uh, I think the way we look at it right now, the 19 is really concerning because keep a look at it. Base power in California, not peak in August in California, but just base power is 25 gigawatt. We're growing almost the state of California in 2.5 years.
Wow. So you're saying
It's
this,
this.
so this
Go
19
ahead.
gigawatts you're referring to, that's actually load that's coming. It's constructed, it's being constructed. That's what you're saying about the 19, right? Yeah.
That's right.
That's
Mhm.
that's like on the books. It's happening and it's got to find a home. It's got to find a wire, right? That's what you're saying.
Right.
So that's all
Mhm.
happening. And you're saying there's not the wire that you can just connect to, right. And so you
Right.
have to go
Right.
off site potentially because the rest that's going to be on the grid, on the wires, it's going to take longer. So there's this toggling between on grid and off grid is kind of what it sounds like you're saying to me. uh,
Yeah. Well, it thinks is where uh how much, if you build it, they will come. Yes. And that can be said to any state, any grid
right,
operator.
right.
But at what point does the ratepayer, people on fixed income, because
Yeah,
it's interesting that the listener, we all need to pay attention to that 65% or higher Americans live paycheck to paycheck.
right, right, right.
65%, right? When you start doubling their power,
Yeah,
especially where there's high lows, they're going to start pushing back,
right.
right?
Well,
So
they're the
you're not
voters.
getting, you're the voters, right? So
Yeah,
so
exactly.
you're not going to get a 2.5 increase of the grid,
Hmm.
right? Because you
Yeah,
say we use that same money to do
yeah,
on-site generation,
right, right.
right?
Yeah. Um, Wow, something else, I kind of want to get your take on the battery storage phenomenon, because obviously it's kind of newer on the books. We know the IRA legislation incentivizes it. There's more on the books in Texas. It's allegedly part of in the queue, right? There's a lot in the queue. I think it says like 141 gigawatts of battery or as of March 2024. So what's your color on just that in a nutshell?
Well, you look at where a developer, an operator for a large energy storage location, how they make money, right? And they're making their money for the most part within auxiliary services. So the question of technology they're going to apply based on the cost per kWh, what does that make sense where they can play from a 1 hour to 2 hour? And most of the matrix says is that you make additional 30% more revenue if you do 2 hour energy storage within the ERCOT market,
Mhm.
right? What does that look like to do a 4 hour, assuming you can handle the capital cost of 4 hours or another technology,
Mhm.
right? But even with that being said, at what point does those services become flooded in the market, right? So right now we have about right at 8 gigawatt of batteries on the grid.
Mhm.
What we see that's been capitalized, like 18, maybe 20 gigawatt of battery. Well, then what does the market look like after that money has been used to do those batteries? What does that look like? Does it push down the price? Right. We're very exposed the way our market is designed that all the low-hanging fruit for making revenue on an energy storage project can get fleshed out pretty quickly, right?
Mhm.
So 140 gigawatt, you know, um, anything like renewable energy storage, we can't get ahead of our base power,
Right.
right? Now, interesting, between uh, Texas can do a lot of good if we had 5 gigawatt, okay, that's height, and 25 gigawatt hour, that's width, right? So, and that's is our weaknesses is between the 5 to 9 p.m. time slot,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And then hits during the day where energy storage is a great thing. It has a unique capability where it can make quite revenue, but you can't have 100 players going after one spike of during the day,
Mhm.
right? Because the spike of that might be only be 4 or 5 gigawatt, and then that's done. And we've already seen effect having less than 1 gigawatt last year to 8 gigawatt this year, that we can pull down that pricing spike very, very quickly. Is a huge difference, which helps the ratepayer,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
renewables and batteries can be very beneficial to the ratepayer, but too much of a good thing causes your cost to go up. So it
Right.
has to be a balancing act,
Right.
right? So it should be the lowest generation cost to benefit the ratepayer,
Right.
right? And renewables have a role to play, regardless of what your stance is in ideology. Renewables do reduce fuel cost,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Right.
Batteries help connect,
Right.
right? Between those time, make it more usable, right? But it's not either or, because either or would be more expensive. Right now, it takes 3 years for me to get a gas turbine generator. Call it something like a 500 megawatt gas generator combined cycle. Takes 3 years,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
What is my load gonna look like in 3 years? The thing about renewables and batteries right now, it's the fastest thing we can put on the grid right now to satisfy the cost and having some power available for incoming load,
Right.
which is great for Texas because it creates revenue, right? Just like any other state.
Right.
But look at Virginia. Virginia is the hottest data center area in the country,
Right.
right? And they're 3.7 gigawatt. I mean, it's tiny, right? That's barely a rounding area in Texas,
What
right?
do you mean? What
So
is exactly is 3.7 gigawatt? Their data
that's
use?
that's the size of their load, period.
You mean the data
All,
centers or all of Virginia? I mean, what are you?
all of Virginia
Oh, okay. That's their whole load.
as a whole load.
That's all that they
Well, it's a tiny state. It's a small
wow,
state.
that is tiny.
I mean, how many Virginias can you fit inside Texas? Texas is a heavy industrial state. Look at California. If you look at California ISO right now, you're going to see between 25 to 28 gigawatt,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
It's noontime during this conversation, right? Versus Texas, we're going to shoot up to 70 to 80 gigawatt,
right.
even though their population is 45 million
Mm-hmm.
and we're 33 million,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Even so, there's at times in the month, especially in the early spring, that we're generating more power than all California has load,
yeah. Wow, we use a lot
right?
of power.
We use an enormous amount of power,
Wow.
right?
Um,
So if you
Interesting.
look at it, if you have something, if you have a 1,400 square foot home in Texas or in California with moderate level, they don't even have central air that's enjoyed quite a bit within Texas. But even then, their power bill is still $1,200 a month,
Right, right.
all in. And the
Yeah.
reason is when you look at data uh, from the EIA, it's going to say that California is something between 15 and 18 cents. That's not exactly accurate because they pull out other line items that is the cost. So you put a total cost hitting the customer, right? So it's
Mm,
many times higher, it's 3 times, 3 to 4 times higher than you would get at Texas, right?
wow.
But we have to be careful because a high ramp within 2.5 years or 20, 30, whatever timeline you put it on it, and you have this huge opportunity that utilities are not used to doing construction that fast because
Right,
it impacts the ratepayer that
right,
terribly, right?
right,
You're writing something a 20-year run up that we're used to and trying to do it in 2.5 years.
right.
How does that impact the ratepayer,
Yeah, right. No, I
right?
know. Yeah. It could be ugly.
It mostly so yeah, that's exactly right.
One other question is, you know, and just, just your high level thoughts, or just a quick general thought. How do you see AI and machine learning helping, given where we are and where we need to go?
Well, from utility space, utility operators are always understaffed. They're not very techy at all, right? So if you ever see an operational center, it's probably not the best enterprise software. It's probably not all the whole 9 yards, right? Both from a human power and technology. It's just not. And the reason is they have to keep the rates low. So not they're not going to run like a Google
Yeah.
or a
Or
Meta,
meta.
what have you,
Yeah.
right? Probably 1% of that,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah.
There's lots of Internet of Things, lots of software, SaaS software. There's lots of AI type stuff, which is a part of software application. They can't afford it and they don't know how to use it, right?
Yeah.
And they don't know how to use it effectively, right? And then what data are you getting, right? Outside, if you have um, you can get on your account and see what KW you're using, what KW you're going. It shows the profile, what else would help the customer who don't pay attention. Because if you look at the log on for customers, like for instance, Smart Meter Texas, that's run by IBM for Texas, for customers to look at their load
Uh-huh.
to see how they're operating. And it's quite detailed. There's
Right.
very, very few people that log on to it.
Right.
They pay their bill and they move on. It's
Right.
auto pay, move on. Not just for residential, but all the way up to industrial. Hit the pay button and move on,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Even though it would tell you exactly how your equipment's running,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So if you have AI and we have AI, so I can tell you how your oil and gas operations is running just by looking at your meter. I can
Mhm.
tell you what piece of equipment is not running well just by
Right.
looking at your electrical meter.
Right.
If you look at a grocery store, we can calculate how much revenue that grocery is making just by looking at its electrical meter.
Mm-hmm.
That's AI,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's really interesting. But who would be the user of that AI intelligence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, from
But
an
who could
oil and
use
gas
it
perspective,
best? Yeah. Who could use it
yeah,
best?
yeah. So we can look at a if a entity needs power to make revenue, then we can figure out how much revenue that entity's making just by looking at the meter. And we've done it thousands of times. We're about like 1 or 2% off from monthly gap,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
right? Just by looking at the electrical meter.
Yeah.
So that's AI.
Right. Right.
That's machine intelligence. So that's something, well, how does that help a utility? How does that help other operations and other categories, right? So can you get the higher level view of how are you running revenue efficient? So consumption of power behind the meter, where the meter is giving you the information to the operator, then it says, hey, I'm going to tell you, not from a facilities standpoint, but from the financial standpoint, to see how revenue efficient you are with your asset. That's
Mm-hmm.
where AI belongs.
Right. Right. Yeah, and it sounds like we're nowhere there yet. And there's just like even this one big district that I was looking at their report, they were saying, oh, we need to integrate and use AI and machine learning and have everybody talk to each other and have these teams and yada yada, all this stuff. And I was like, oh wow, yeah, that sounds right. And then but what you're describing is like, we're nowhere near that. That all sounds good. but
Well,
there's a lot to
we
make that happen, and it takes like an individual company like yours. That's you're one piece of this pie that can help this along, right?
Yeah, well, we're already doing it, and we
Yeah,
with the financial partners we work with, if we look at an asset, we ask access to their electrical data, and we figure out how much revenue they're really making relative to their P&L.
yeah, mhm,
It's just another perspective,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So that's where it really belongs. But from a utility perspective, it's too much. They want to know about reliability and affordability and what helps them, right?
yeah,
So from the off taker, they're going to say the only thing from an operator that's running a fab, big loads, or even a Bitcoin area, how's your machines running, what have you, to protect your revenue efficiency. But it's machine learning. If you look at it, this very AI means it can create. So even the best AI out there, even the stuff that's not publicized, right? So you got Microsoft AI, you got Google AI, you got Open AI.
yep,
None of them can create.
right, right,
None
right,
of them,
right. Yeah,
right?
they're scraping from data, and yeah, they're not.
It's machine data, putting it away where a human can understand it. That's where the energy is spent on these big data centers, of putting in a format that a human can understand it. And a human is extremely slow and very narrow in our understanding, right? If you look at true the AI that we look at, which looks broad, most humans can't understand it. We have to have subprograms to interpret what the machine saying, if it's lying to us, or is there a software bug or whatever, right? And we find out it's right. It's just we're not smart enough to understand it initially.
Mhm.
Where'd you come up with this result from, Mr. Machine?
Yeah,
And we have to go back because okay, we're not understanding it, and
right.
that's right, right? So there is some help over there, but the scraping of public data is usually shows a 20% failure rate right now because of the public failure. So they can't distinguish between quality data, which is one reason data
Right,
centers are AI data centers per se are taking so much power because it's looking at everything
right,
versus saying, how do you scrape between quality data versus mass data,
right,
right?
right,
And then, so how do you distinguish that? That's the ticket, that's the difficulty, that's the challenge,
right,
right?
right,
Now,
right,
ours is controlled as taking meter data. Well, that's a revenue grade sensor that is
right.
different from other sensors in buildings, what have you, which are not regulatory type, high level of certainty. That's exactly the power you're taking because I'm going to charge you for it. Right. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of oversight. So that's a high quality sensor, that meter, right?
Mhm.
And you look at high quality sensors that have that much liability attached to it,
Yeah.
you might have maybe 18 or 20 sensors in the world that have that.
Yeah.
period. Not millions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe less than 2 dozen.
Mm-hmm.
That's the shocker.
Yeah. So in other words, the data you're pulling has this, let's call it integrity to it because of the nature of it. Therefore, it's kind of like it's a truer picture of, it's gonna spit out a better result for you because of the data's, good
It
quality.
gives us a more accurate projection,
Right. Yeah,
right?
that's interesting.
What's happening today is solid, and then we say, okay, what does tomorrow look like,
Right.
right?
Right.
And is able to look the history,
Hmm.
right? So that's the kind of stuff that how AI can project. Project me what the next
Yeah,
year load is
predictive.
going to look at.
Yeah. Yeah, the predictive analytics stuff.
That's exactly right. Mhm.
Um so this is sort of a tangential question. This is sort of a last question I have. So in your view, are we, just looking at energy sources, like solar, wind, natural gas fired power, nuclear, whatever, the main sources that we source from, are we building what we need to optimize the grid from your point of view? Um, to match supply and demand, just top level thought.
Yeah. So that's a good sized question. So
Yeah, sorry.
be patient with me, and I'll
Yeah, yeah.
try to be concise more
You're
than
gonna
a
have to
minute.
grind.
Yeah. So is wind solar energy storage associated with our economic health for prosperity? To a small degree, yes. Now, is fossil fuels connected to prosperity in the way we live? Yes, because it's more than just an electron. It's also does medical, it does food. People don't know that the raw natural gas,
Yeah,
25% raw natural gas is used to make 50% of the world's food.
right,
And
right,
all the replacements thereof, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, makes it 6 times more expensive,
right,
right? You
right.
remember, if you're $35,000, you're in 1% of wealth in the world.
Hmm.
$35,000.
Yeah,
Now, $35,000 is not much to live on, but if you had 35,000 from a world perspective, you'd be in a 1% of wealth in the world,
right,
right?
right, right.
So if you double the cost of food, that's the problem,
Yeah,
right?
right,
All the plastic we have, all of us who listens to this recording, you're looking for from your machine has enormous amount of fossil fuel product to make that laptop, your cell phone, and on and on and on, and what you're eating and drinking, right? And your medical, right? So it is how to replace fossil fuels but yet create the same prosperity.
yeah,
That changes your generation mix,
right.
right? And when do we do that, right? Is it EV vehicle? Is it hybrid? Or is it ICE motors,
Yeah,
right? It's a transitional period.
right. But I mean, and just in terms of optimization, I mean, looking at the Texas grid, because we do have all these different mixed sources. I mean, it seems like, just from what I can, just observing over time, that we're about as good as it gets, and we're bumping up to some of the limits of, how much more renewables you can actually put on a grid,
Hmm.
optimize it at a point in time, right? Um, and,
Hmm.
and I don't know that any AI or anything, I don't know that that can solve that equation for you, that optimization problem, because it seems like it's just a picture that's moving in time with all kinds of factors, right? Um,
Hmm.
so I don't
I
know if
think,
I don't know if there is an answer to that
well,
question.
the answer is a combination of you need strong base power for things that run 24/7.
Right,
So you're probably looking in a neighborhood of various sizes of nuclear, modular nuclear that's closer to the load,
right,
that if you use a fuel, a nuclear fuel, plutonium, like a 232 plutonium, if it has a runaway, that it doesn't melt down the unit. It just stays at one temperature and that's it, right? So there's plenty of safe fuels, but in a regulatory standpoint, to make modular nuclear safe fuel being used, they're not allowed to go above 20% concentration, and modular nuclear power plants have to run hotter than those big giant nuclear power plants that we currently have. But that would be the answer to avoid the huge amount of overhead grid infrastructure that is too harmful for where the American public is at right now, period.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So fuels, anytime renewables can be used to reduce the fuel cost
Right.
without increasing the cost to the ratepayer, it's a
Right.
go.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
the East Coast is heavy populous. So wind's not going to happen too much. A little bit of solar, and places that are have great wind and great sun. That's where they go to bring down the fuel costs. In the
Yeah.
meantime, we always believe on a capital perspective that needs power to run. We always believe in reduce before you produce. So
Mm-hmm.
if I have a fab that requires 300 megawatt to run, I'm going to see, well, where is that load being consumed? How do we make it more efficient? It runs the same. It doesn't affect my revenue. What we really looking at this possible will be reduce the load, but yet have the same output. And that's where some AI comes in to help
Mm-hmm.
out the engineering facilities people to figure out the
Right.
plant layout. As an
Right.
example, we were going to do a fab overseas in the Philippines for Texas Instruments because it's too expensive to do a 300 millimeter fab in Texas Instruments, right? Well, they figured out how to make their plant run much more efficiently that they can build it here, and they did,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
that was before AI, right?
Yeah.
But if you're
Yeah.
looking at mass, if you the equation is lowest, highest reliability, right? And understanding each of things in your toolbox,
Yeah.
right? So from the regulatory standpoint, we need tons of more of guidance and understanding on both sides on the National Regulatory Commission to get them up to speed. They're very legacy. To
Mm.
understand, hey, here's safe, not safe. How do we accelerate the commercialization, the production of, call it 30 megawatt power plants,
Mhm.
right? On batteries, those is sulfur lithium the answer for cost, not just for grid, but also for automotive,
Mhm.
right? So what other technology we can do to make whatever we do increases prosperity for everyone in the United States and doesn't burden them and make them poorer, but richer.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's the optimization. And that, like you said, that sort of, it does change in time. And also, there is that, the nuclear solution is, the obvious one in some respects for baseload growth, all this stuff clean. But yeah, we have to like shift a little bit to get there, and that's going to take a while, it sounds like. Are there any, final some thoughts that you have that germane to what we're talking about before we call it a day? Um,
Well, there's a huge amount of opportunity. It takes a lot of work when we were saying let's cut down our power plants, let's cut our emissions. But at the same token, we're having once in a lifetime opportunity to double our load, which creates jobs, which creates prosperity, and
right,
how we do that,
right,
right? So we had the same thing after World War II, right?
right,
Huge
right.
amount of prosperity. We're in that event again
Yeah,
because of all the incoming manufacturing overseas, because now it's cheaper to build here because eventually everybody gets levelized, right? So
right.
the cost to build in China, when you add logistics, it's the same price I can build it here.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, over time, yeah. And that's come clearer, right? It's just come clearer post-pandemic that, this is a new world we're living in.
That
And
was a big catalyst,
yeah,
how much relied on the world stuff. But the thing that is the US can no longer afford, like we've done for the last 70 years, to protect the trade routes. Every single trade route in the world was protected by the US military.
so it sounds like, one other thing, just putting a pin in this with ERCOT, you know, I think you had mentioned that these other areas, these other, power regions. I forget what they're called, MISO and all those.
Yeah, MISO, PJM.
MISO, yeah, those. What do you call them? Power regions, or
Still
regional.
grid operators. It's just they
Okay,
have
grid operators.
multi-states.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it sounds like they're all watching us because of our market, and to see kind of what we do and how we do it, because we're kind of leading the pack in all kinds of respects. So that's good for you
I'll,
as a
I'll
business.
I'll speak to that. Yes, not just in the U.S. Utility grid observers, but also the world.
Hmm,
Texas is so big in load and so big in renewables. Is Texas able to connect the two and still create prosperity?
right, right,
That's
right.
threading a needle.
Right. Right. No, I know. It's going to be really fascinating to watch these next 5 years. I mean, they're sort of critical in some respects to get it right. And I feel like if it's going to happen, it can happen here, though. There's so many innovative people and so many people that, love a challenge and want to see things happening. So I feel pretty.
There is, and there's AI looking at obviously where Texas gets hampered with Winter Storm Uri, with the hurricane. Burley came in, knocked out
Yeah.
Houston, 2.8 million people, and one caused the other. Out of the Winter Storm Uri and the previous two ice storms, you harm trees. And so Texas will grow about 6 inches of limb growth every year in a normal year. When you have a severe winter event, that tree super grows. It goes from 6 inches to 2 feet to 4 feet in 1 year,
Mm,
right? So you have a lot of growth. So that takes down the distribution level. While I just have a normal Cat 1 hurricane, and it takes down the whole grid,
mm,
right? So we're looking for AI with drones to identify where's the most severe growth within a city like Houston that needs trimming immediately,
mm-hmm.
because that was 90% of the problem.
Wow. Trees. Oh my
It was
gosh.
mo it was distribution. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was distribution. So, your wooden poles, even though they might be aged and what have you, but
Right.
when you add this enormous amount of vegetation growth, trees, trying to recover from injury, you have a problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because there's also a corollary to that with some of the fires. There's like trees, not trees. Well, trees are important. Um,
Well, you know what? It's where the distribution grid resides in a populous area.
yeah, sure.
So
Yeah.
how we maintain that, um, it says, well, how could we go through these other hurricanes in Texas? And then we had this little storm just recently take out 2.8 million people, members, from that utility.
Yeah.
So if they knew that this is the severity of their vegetation growth, tree growth, then they would have acted differently, if not asked for help,
Right.
right?
Right.
So do you want help after the storm or pre-storm,
Yeah.
right?
Get your
So
blades out and let's go.
yeah, any homeowner that went through Winter Storm Uri and the previous ice storms afterwards actually look at their trees and how fast they grew, new
Yeah.
limbs all over the place. Well, that's natural,
Yeah.
right? So it was highly accelerated, but one affects the other. It's a domino effect.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
AI has to wake up to human and say, hey, you're creating a domino effect, and this will happen, big storm,
Right.
right, after these events, right?
Right.
Regardless of what you do with it, right?
Right. Right.
So we can put everything on the ground, that
Right.
enormous amount of infrastructure. Says Houston is the biggest city in the world by square mile,
Mm,
right? So put all that stuff underground. Who pays for that?
yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah, no, I know. No, I know. Built on a legacy system, and it's expensive. Yeah, and it's expensive to redo. Um,
Yeah, and some of it might be just impossible, but the thing about it is, if we understand the root cause, same thing with Winter Storm, we still don't truly understand the root cause of Winter Storm Uri. We just shotgun it and made the easy solution and executed. Same thing with Houston, the hurricane they just went through. We're not really understanding the root cause of why the wires fell down,
right,
right?
right,
Just because
yeah,
it's a 20, 40-year pole, wooden pole, doesn't mean that was the cause.
right, 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 exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you for your insights and being somebody who's really deep into the grid work and all that. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome, Jennifer. I appreciate it.